The mating and dating market is broken for many reasons, but there are a few reasons that I think don't get talked about enough, and that's what I wanted to talk about in this video. Now, obviously, dating does not work the way it used to. Marriage and family formation are much less common than they used to be. The general relationship between the sexes is not as good as it used to be or should be. And whether you're on some extreme end of things or whether you're more of the average person, you notice this in various ways, and almost everybody will complain about it and be discouraged by it at some points or another in their life. So what are three things that are breaking the dating and mating market that don't get talked about enough? So the first one is how hypervisual society has become. Now, of course, by hypervisual, I mean that the visual aspect is way overemphasized in everything. And to be fair, this is not just in the dating market, this is in the job market, this is in general social standing. Of course, it can affect someone's general status, how they're perceived, because that, of course, is the first thing people will perceive about another person is what they look like. But whereas before the rise of visual media, the perception of people was more balanced. And now I'm not saying that ugly people were somehow treated really well once upon a time, or that attractive people were once treated exactly the same as average looking people or ugly people. I'm not saying that. But what I'm saying is that right now it is extremely overemphasized, and I would say to the point of being cartoonish. Refer to, say, clavicular or something like that. Now, of course, right now things are very hypervisual because dating apps are the predominant way that most people date and meet and hook up and things like that. And even a lot of, or I think it's most relationships now start online or through an app in some capacity. I think the current stat is somewhere around like 55 or 60%. So it's the majority. So of course, on a dating app, looks are incredibly overemphasized. And of course, that was the case when it was mainly dating sites that people would use before, say, smartphones. And then, of course, social media is incredibly visual. But people tend to not have a very long memory when it comes to this stuff, or not think very far back. But it actually started way before that. And in the 20th century, the big one, of course, was film and television. Now, I don't remember the sources, but I do remember a long time ago reading about how film and television changed the general idea of what the ideal man or woman was supposed to look like. And so if you looked back at, say, common attire and fashion trends and things like makeup use or hairstyles or grooming habits from, say, the 1950s or 60s or just many prior decades, a lot of it could be traced to things like Hollywood movies, advertising campaigns, television shows, things like this. So basically the visual media of those eras influenced how people saw appearances. Now, I think the main difference here is not so much in it was a truly different phenomenon, but just that it was much more tempered than what we have today, which is completely imbalanced. And like I said earlier, it's comical at this point. So of course, I don't expect that to change anytime soon, but since there's kind of the expectation now that everyone needs to be the most physically appealing version of what a human being can be, that by default leaves most people having to struggle just to sort of break even, so to speak. And of course, very much so when it comes to dating. All right, now the second thing that I think has really adversely affected the dating market is the death of monoculture. And this has been talked about a lot on YouTube. There are a lot of good videos about it. But basically what this means is that before the advent of smartphones, social media, and the proliferation of the internet, that there was a monoculture. There was a more solid, monolithic, shared culture that pretty much everybody partook of, or was at least aware of, and therefore could participate in, could talk about, and so on. Now, of course, that is completely gone because now you might have 10 people in a room, and of course, those 10 people will have their noses buried in their phones. But if they do bring their heads up to talk to each other, they will have 10 different conceptions of what is popular, what the current entertainment is, what the current music is, what current events need to be talked about, or what side of politics need to be talked about, or current events. And so it is just scattered, it's all over the place. It's very hard now to talk to people and have any certainty that what you're talking about is going to be understood by the other person, or that they're going to have any awareness. And now millennials and older do still remember the monoculture and have some, I guess, not expectation of it, but they have a memory of it. And so they tend to see a little bit of both sides, because now a lot of millennials are really adapting to having this scattered, I guess we would call it polyculture. But with, say, Gen Z, it is all polyculture, and they just don't have any shared entertainment. Now, there might be some shared things that everyone knows about, and sadly, a lot of this stuff is like brain rot stuff. And I know a lot of that is the Gen Alpha kids and everything too, doing like well, I'm not even going to say it, but basically that brain rot stuff that kind of transfers like a mind virus or something. So anyway, I think this doesn't get talked about enough, because although monoculture is talked about on the internet, or the death of monoculture is talked about, what isn't talked about as much is how that makes it harder to have social bonds and community. And therefore it makes the dating market more difficult, because it just becomes harder by default to have things in common, to find those common interests, to go watch a movie that both of you will know about, unless it's an old movie or something, to share the same taste in music, and really many other categories. And you could say, well, that doesn't really affect things. I mean, relationships, it's nice if you and your significant other have the same taste in music, or you like the same movies. But my point is, it makes the dating market more difficult, because that's how relationships start more. Once you're established, it's not as important, but earlier on, those common interests, even some superficial ones, play a more important role. And so in the absence of those, it just gets much more difficult to date, to get out there and put yourself out there socially, to talk to people and have any reasonable expectation that you're going to be able to understand each other in terms of the culture and media that you partake in. Okay, so what is the third thing that is really destroying the dating market and making it insane out there? And this is something I'm going to call desperationomics. So basically the economics of desperation. Put short, the harder it is to survive and live a basic lifestyle, the fewer children people will have. The fewer people will get together and get married and build lives together and start households and start families. And this is just tragically the way it is. And it seems like whenever this topic comes up, there's inevitably someone, probably of an older generation, who will chime in and say, well, I knew such and such couples growing up, or, when I was young, and they got together right out of high school, and they were poor. They didn't have 2 dimes to rub together, but they made it work, and they had true love, and they stayed together through thick and thin, and they ended up having 18 kids together, and they've been married for 60 years now, and all of this. And there used to be such stories. They used to be, at least, everyone would know someone like that. But what isn't talked about is that those hail from a time when children were not the economic burden that they are now. And I'm not saying that children should be seen as an economic burden, or that this is really how things ought to be, but this is the reality in the kind of economies we have now, which are largely consumer-based or services-based instead of agrarian. Because when most people were in agriculture, children were an asset. And so you could be a poor farming family, but you were actually much more well off if you had more children despite being in poverty. Whereas in 2026, if you are poor and you have, say, 4 children, you are probably never going to get out of the hole economically. I mean, per child, you're looking at somewhere between, I think it was 500,000 to $750,000 to raise one child from birth to 18. So if you have 4 children, you've automatically got a $3 million deficit that most people are just never going to make up and exceed. And so, of course, this drives the population down. And when the population declines, the economy declines. That's just how it works. The economic system we have means that if it's not growing, which means the population has to be growing, then it's not doing well. It has to grow or it's doing badly. So it's a negative feedback loop that just makes conditions worse, and then the spiral starts all over again. Economy declines, population declines, which means the economy goes down, which means population goes down. People get together less often. People have less time to spend on social lives, friends, family, civic participation, which is pretty much a dead concept now anyway. And, well, you can go read some real history books if you want to get the gist of where all this goes in the end. So basically, as people get more desperate, they get together less. So that means the dating market is very much strained under such an economic reality. And I will probably make more videos about sort of desperationomics, as I call it. But when you look also at how prevalent gambling is now, or the concept of YOLOing into something, even though it's objectively stupid, and the vast majority of people who do that lose everything. The mentality is hard to stop because that is where we are now. That is the unpleasant reality for so many people now. But anyway, those are the 3 things that I think don't get talked about enough that are ruining the dating market, and of course adversely affecting a lot of things. Like I said, it's a negative feedback loop. So if you agree or disagree, let me know in the comments. And if you think there's something else that I'm missing or that I didn't explain enough of it, just let me know and I can make more videos around this topic in the future. If you wouldn't mind liking, subscribing, sharing the video. You can also now support me on Ko-Fi. There's a link in my bio, and I will try to remember to put that in the description too. So any support helps. I'm going to try to grow the channel, make more videos, hopefully get some proper equipment, and eventually I would like to get some video images made by human artists instead of using AI, which is all I can afford at the moment. So thanks for watching, and we will see you in the next one.